Well, thank you very much. It's really exciting to be able to present to you guys, and I have to say that this is a very different type of webinar for Marcia and I, because it's kind of nice that we actually get to hear the people in the room rather than just speaking to, you know, a brick wall, so to speak. So that's great. And thank you, Sharda, for providing such a wonderful framing and explaining of urban ag and urban ag issues. You've enabled me to quickly go through some of my beginning slides. But before we get started, I just wanted to say that Tom has charged us with providing an overview of not only how local governments are using zoning regulations to permit the keeping of animals, but also how they're using such regulations to permit the sale of produce. And then finally, how urban agriculture fits into a larger community-based food system. And so I'm going to focus more on the regulation side, and Marcia will be focusing more on the community-based food systems approach. So I've just advanced to the next slide. I hope you can see that. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on defining urban agriculture, but I just wanted to let you know that Marcia and I, and actually Martin, we took a very comprehensive approach at looking at urban agriculture, and we wanted to, you know, basically expand people's notions of what urban agriculture is. So to think more that, you know, urban agriculture can occur in all shapes and sizes, and it can occur almost anywhere in a community and at varying intensities. So this is a typology that we created for the report. Basically, you know, there's all these different types of urban ag. A lot of people talk about community gardens. A lot of people talk about backyard chickens, you know, and other types of urban farms. But how do you think about all these different types? And there's such differences in scales across the community and so on. So we kind of created three categories or types: non-commercial urban agriculture, commercial, and hybrid. And so non-commercial really focuses on growing food for personal consumption, as well as things like donation and educational purposes or healing purposes. And then commercial really focuses on growing food for sale. And then hybrid is this kind of new approach of merging these two types. So we're seeing a lot of these, a lot of social nonprofits or social enterprises popping up to provide not only the educational part that urban agriculture can provide, but also, you know, providing, also making a profit so that they can cover some of these other social, economic, and social services and educational services. So I created a little slideshow here of some different types of urban agriculture, because I want to make sure that everyone in the audience thinks very broadly about what urban ag looks like. So this first slide is just a private garden on a balcony in Washington, D.C. that really includes basically 3 big Rubbermaid containers, and this person is growing zucchini and tomatoes on their balcony. This is a community garden in Philadelphia, and it was basically they reused a very small lot, kind of sandwiched in between 3 different buildings, and this is just outside of downtown. This is a demonstration garden at the University of Washington. So this garden is used not necessarily to produce food for consumption, but more so for educational purposes. This is a demonstration garden outside of Baltimore City Hall. Again, this is not necessarily used for eating purposes, but more for education and to show people what it is to grow food, what it looks like, where it can happen. And you probably might recognize this school. This is actually in Denver. So just an example of a school garden. This is actually taken when I was attending the American Dietetic Association in Denver a few years ago. And again, this is another example in Denver, but this is run by a nonprofit that focuses more on providing a garden for healing purposes. And this one is all raised beds so that people in wheelchairs can have better access. And then this is an urban farm out in Northern Virginia that supplies, or has a CSA program with like 1,000 families in the Washington, D.C. region. And then this is an example of an urban farm where they reuse a brownfield property and abandoned greenhouses to create or to grow food. And then finally, this is a hybrid example from New Orleans, where they have a community garden, which you're seeing right in front of you. And behind those structures is row crops. So they have their for sale profit side, and then they have on-site sales and educational activities in that in one of those structures as well. So I'm not really going to talk about the health, nutrition, or economic or environmental social benefits, because I thought Sharada did a wonderful job of covering those, but I just wanted to reiterate that they're also important. But I did want to say that beyond the benefits, there are some risks, and I think it's really important that these be known. And those risks include direct and indirect contact with contaminated soil, also contact with pesticides and fertilizers used in food production, and also contact with water polluted by contaminated soil, fertilizers, and pesticides. So it's important to know that there are some risks involved, and that's why assessments of soil quality is so important. Beyond health risks, there are certain land use risks and conflicts that could arise due to issues such as noise and odor issues if urban ag operations are not managed properly. So just keep those in mind as we move forward. So this next slide provides you with basically all the variety of factors that are really important for urban agriculture. So the success of urban ag is really dependent on a lot of things, like the growing season and climate, the availability and accessibility of land, water, light, adequate healthy soil and labor, but also the presence of insects and diseases, cost of production, shelf life of a crop, as Sharada mentioned, transportation infrastructure, consumer demand, viable markets, and so on. So there are a lot of different things that are necessary for urban ag, but while governmental and non-governmental entities have little influence over things like climate or growing season, insects and pests and things like that, they have a lot of influence over things like essential resources such as access to growing space, access to land, access to healthy soil, access to water, and other things like financial and technical assistance. And also they can influence urban demand for consumer access of local agricultural products. So built out cities and older industrial cities, and as well as suburban, exurban, and rural communities are all, as we know, very, very different, and they present a variety of different opportunities and challenges. So while there is no one-size-fits-all approach to urban agriculture, there are 5 main tools that planners and local governments can use regardless of the context to support many types and forms and intensities of urban agriculture. So I'm going to briefly go over all 5, but I'm going to be focusing today on number 4, which is policies and regulations. So number 1 is basically planners can help develop and foster partnerships and collaborate with different sectors, such as public health, economic development, cooperative extension, and other nonprofits. Planners can also develop standalone plans or integrate urban agriculture into existing comprehensive sustainability or other strategic and functional plans. And they can also evaluate how existing policies and regulations either support or inhibit urban ag, and develop new policies and regulations to make it easier for urban ag and all its complexity and different forms to thrive across the community. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. But last but not least, working with other governmental sectors to develop public programs is very important as well. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of factors that influence the success of urban ag, but there are also a lot of factors that local governments really need to consider when regulating urban agriculture. So I've mentioned a lot of the ones that are already up on the slide right now, but also their community needs, and sometimes that kind of gets left out. So size and scale are important, location, distribution, purpose of activities, type of activities, intensities of activities, and as well as accessory activities and structures, and then obviously community needs. So things to think about are, should backyard private gardens be considered the same as large community gardens or a multi-acre commercial urban farm? And should non-commercial urban activities be located in the same places as commercial activities? Where should educational activities be located? And how should urban ag be distributed across the jurisdiction? And what types and intensities of activities will be allowed in different areas in your jurisdiction? For example, so should fruit and vegetable production be allowed right next to raising of animals and keeping of bees? Or should urban ag activities that are more for personal consumption be allowed in the same places where on-site sales are occurring? And also, what types of accessory activities and structures will be allowed? So I already mentioned on-site sales, but there's composting, there are storage sheds, there are things like cold storage, there are hoop houses and greenhouses and community kitchens and food hubs and farm stands. So there are a lot of things to consider when regulating urban ag. So one of the most important things is to consider our community needs. So what exactly do I mean by community needs? Well, it's important to answer certain questions like, are there specific neighborhoods that do not have access to healthy, affordable food? Do people in your jurisdiction understand where food comes from? Is there a need to encourage greater interaction among residents in a certain neighborhood? Does your jurisdiction have a lot of vacant space? If not, are there opportunities to collaborate with institutions that do have land but aren't fully utilizing that land? And then do some neighborhoods perhaps lack parks and open space compared to others? So it's really important to think about all these different community needs. So I'm just going to give you quickly one example about how Cleveland is addressing community needs. And basically they did a mapping study. They wanted to see, where are the community gardens and urban farms currently located, and where is there gaps across the community, and how can they target those gap areas to provide the same types of amenities or urban ag amenities in those areas. So another very important thing to consider are definitions and types. So there are a variety of different types of urban agriculture. So a lot of the things listed on this slide are very important to think about. So, are you going to allow urban agriculture that produces plants, that produces non-edible plants, that, are you going to allow keeping of chickens, livestock, bees, what types of livestock, how big are they going to be, how are you going to do all this? And then also, various production techniques. I've mentioned a few of them already, but how are you, are you going to allow hoop houses and hydroponics and aquaponics and so on? And then another thing that a lot of people forget to think about is hours of operation. So if you are allowing on-site sales, are you allowing people to be selling 24 hours a day or only certain times of the day? So a third important factor are related activities. So, what activities related to urban ag should be allowed and what conditions should be placed on them? So again, thinking about sales on-site versus off-site, whether farm stands are allowed, whether a farmer market is allowed on-site. Also thinking about storage and then processing, as well as distribution and even composting. So this slide basically compares the definitions used by several local governments to explain urban ag types and their associated activities. And so Safety Harbor, Florida defines community gardens as an area of land managed and maintained by a group of individuals or nonprofit organization to grow and harvest food crops and or non-food crops for personal or group use, consumption, donation, or non-profit sale off-site. So Cleveland defines community gardens in a very similar way, but they don't allow any sales from the production of food. However, they did create a new definition for a different type of urban ag, which they call market garden, and that allows on-site sales. Kansas City created 4 different categories of urban agriculture: the home garden, community supported agriculture, and crop agriculture. And they all offer, they all have slightly different regulations. For instance, crop agriculture allows bees and animals, where home gardening does not really specify that. But I found it quite interesting that they all allow on-site sales, but they have specific restrictions. So, for instance, off-site sales are more encouraged for crop agriculture than some of the other ones. Seattle also has gone a step further to further define what they mean by animal husbandry and aquaculture. So a fourth important factor to consider is location. So where should different types of urban agriculture occur? I've already mentioned a few of these things, but the availability of land is really important. The compatibility of neighboring land uses, growing medium is very important, water access, and community needs. So this slide basically looks at the intensity of urban ag activities and the distribution of urban ag activities across the community. So for example, are the, for example, backyard and community gardens are the least intensive types of urban ag and may require the least amount of space versus rural and peri-urban farms that are much more intensive and that do a lot of crop and animal production. So thinking about intensity and distribution are very important when regulating urban ag. So this chart provides an overview of what several local governments considered when deciding how to regulate where urban ag should occur. So a lot of these conducted a land inventory. They also, as in the case with Kansas City, Minneapolis, they looked at neighboring land uses and how that might impact urban ag. 3 of them looked at, community need, and Kansas City, Minneapolis considered soil contamination and brownfield assessments. And Minneapolis also looked at water access, and a couple of them also considered animal and health safety. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over these couple of slides, but I wanted to get to the last 2 factors. So another thing to consider is whether or not urban ag should be either permitted or conditionally permitted in existing zoning districts, or should urban agriculture be a new zoning district? So several communities have amended or changed their existing zoning districts to allow urban agriculture. So for example, in Seattle, Washington, they amended their zoning code to allow urban farms in most zones as an accessory use with specific restrictions in residential districts. And they also said that urban farms that were more than 4,000 square feet would be allowed by conditional use permit as an accessory use. Cleveland allows agriculture uses in existing residential districts, but specifies that on-site sales are allowed if ag is the principal use of the property and only use, and no sales should be made before 8 a.m. or after dusk. So there are some additional considerations to think about when permitting or allowing animals and bees, and that includes thinking about, what types will you allow: chickens, roosters, rabbits, goats, pigs, cows, horses. There are a lot of different types of animals. And how many should you allow per square feet in different zoning districts? What should the setback be? What should you prohibit, if anything? And how should you regulate coops and cages? And then what about enclosures and fences? And so this just kind of provides you with an overview of what's happening in Cleveland versus Seattle, and both of them are regulating animals and bees in their zoning code, but Cleveland has different restrictions for residential and non-residential zones, while Seattle permits some animals and bees in all zones as an accessory use. These regulations are different because they take into account differences of each municipality. Seattle is built out, they have a little vacant land, where Cleveland has lots of land and more space. And it's interesting to note that Seattle prohibits roosters, while Cleveland does, actually Cleveland does also prohibit roosters, but they also prohibit geese and turkeys. And Seattle prohibits swine except for miniature pot-bellied pigs. And last but not least, there are many ways to avoid certain issues. And I just wanted to take one more minute to talk about this, but planners and local governments can conduct farmers to better understand the issues and potential policy barriers to operating a community garden or urban farm. And they did this in Cleveland with large success. Planners can also address potential public and environmental health risks like cockfighting, nuisances, injuries, illness, and vermin. They can address these head on by involving experts from the local health department or other entity from the very beginning. And that's extremely important. And again, Cleveland was very successful because they did this. Planners can also collaborate with environmental health department staff, Department of Agriculture, extension specialists, and so on. And this was the case that they did this in Vancouver, British Columbia, again with good success. And last but not least, planners can also develop or adopt good management practices. So this was done in Vancouver, both for the keeping of hens and for the keeping of bees. And providing these guidelines, they really helped avoid certain issues. And then last but not least, in the case of Seattle, they require a farm management plan as a requirement for their conditional use permit. So this way that they can basically address potential negative impacts head on and include mitigation measures to address those issues. So I'm going to end with this slide and hand it over to Marcia. But basically, I wanted just to let you know that, urban ag is one part of this larger food system continuum. And Marcia's going to talk a little bit more about this. But what this slide shows is that, there are a variety of different types of urban ag. And, policy should support this diversity and also the diversity in related activities, and not just community gardens and backyard chickens, because it's a lot more than that.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Thanks very much, Tim. And an additional housekeeping note to Tom's comment. I just this morning sent him a list of web links related to the two cases that I'll be presenting very quickly here. And I know time is of the essence. We're running a little behind. But he'll post those along with the other material, and that will give you links to the plans that I'm talking about in my section of the presentation. And then just a quick comment about the audience today. I have been in community food systems planning since the late 1990s. I am one of the people who helped get it off the ground, one of a number of folks who did. And it is so gratifying to hear all the interest in the room and to also have been preceded by these two terrific presenters, and I'm looking forward to hearing about Denver Seeds. From my perspective, this is just a wonderful development of interest and flourishing of interest. Kim, would you advance to the first of my slides, please? Kim's presentation has given us a lot to think about with respect to what constitutes the range of urban agriculture activities, that urban ag is far more than backyard chickens and community gardens, and she's given us a wealth of information on how local governments seek to regulate urban agriculture as an activity. My job today is to step back, to fly a little higher, and to look at the connections between urban agriculture and the larger food system. By way of illustration down the line, I'll be talking about the city of Minneapolis and the planning process that it has gone through for urban agriculture in relation to some larger comprehensive and sustainability plans. And then I'll also talk about the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, a very large-scale regional planning effort that has recently gone on. So what's a food system? It's all the interconnected activities that get food from the farm to the plate, from the field to the table, including growing, processing, preparing, buying, and disposing of food. And the larger food system is made up of many community or local food systems and is served by a regional food system, and all of that fits within the larger global food system. There are lots of reasons and benefits for local governments to address food system issues. Chief among them that food system activities make up a really large percentage of land use in many communities and create a lot of economic value through the growing distribution, processing, repackaging, retailing, preparing, warehousing of food and agricultural products. And community and regional food systems planning addresses multiple issues: food security, public health, social justice, ecological health, economic vitality. Access to affordable, safe, fresh, and healthy food is a benefit to residents and communities. And as Sharada described in her presentation, there really is a direct connection between people's ability to access healthy food and rates of diet-related diseases, which we are encountering with increasing frequency all across the U.S. And these diet-related diseases know no one socioeconomic class. It's across the population. One of the other important cases to be made for community and regional food systems planning is how it strengthens and makes visible the local and regional relationships pertaining to the food system, And when we integrate sustainable food production into communities, we build livable communities, we strengthen local economies, we reduce waste, soil erosion, and the use of non-renewable energy sources. We help control stormwater runoff, and in general, just make cities and regions more resilient, more sustainable places. Okay, there are a number of common activities that occur in food system planning, and they're things that are not at all unfamiliar to planners who, even those who are just now encountering this area of work. We do a lot of things to inform decision-making processes by compiling data. We can encourage sustainable food production through plans, policies, and programming, which you heard Kim talk about quite a bit. We can improve healthy food access through zoning, through education, through incentives, through retail operations. We can support local and regional food economies, and we can minimize or reuse food waste. We also can do things that help build social cohesion and that allow us to have a better understanding of diverse cultures and groups, and build trust and collaboration. And as both Sharada and Kim made reference to, it's really important for all of us to be food secure and literate, really understand where our food comes from, how it has been produced, and what constitutes safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food for everyone, with this long-term goal of creating healthier, more sustainable food systems, communities, and people. Next slide, please. All right, so the first case study is one of Homegrown Minneapolis, and this is one that we used in the PAS report that Kim and I are co-authors on. And just to give quick background on Minneapolis, Minneapolis-St. Paul, the region has decades of strong regional and comprehensive planning, dating back a very long time to the 1967 act that requires comprehensive planning. The 2009 Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan includes urban ag in 4 chapters: open space and parks, the environment, public services and facilities, and urban design. There is also a sustainability plan that was first developed in 2003, updated with key indicators in 2005, and then revised in 2009 to include local foods, waste reduction, and recycling. The Minneapolis-St. Paul region is characterized by a lot of local food production activity. The typical rural upper Midwest multi-generational farming communities combined with peri-urban immigrant farming populations that come out of subsistence farming cultures and have brought that to the United States. A sizable community gardening movement and lots of urban agriculture activity. And the belief in this region is that a strong local food system will positively impact health, food security, environment, and economy in the surrounding region. The city of Minneapolis viewed its role as one of supporting residents' efforts to grow, sell, distribute, and consume more fresh, sustainably produced, and locally grown foods. And this is not unlike what I heard a number of you say as you were introducing yourselves at the beginning of the session here. Strengths and gaps in the region. Strengths include small-scale production and distribution of locally grown foods, and the gaps are really familiar ones: inequitable access of healthy food, lack of infrastructure to support local food production and distribution, soil contamination and remediation issues, lack of communication and coordination among a variety of players and stakeholders in the food system, and a rural, peri-urban, urban disconnect between producers and consumers that the region sought to make changes to. Next slide. So Homegrown Minneapolis was characterized by 2 very distinct phases. One was a heavy process phase that was building on the concept of the strong local food system that I described just a few minutes ago, with the Minneapolis Department of Health and Family Support being the primary coordinating agency, and they were funded with a large multi-year grant from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Over 100 stakeholders participated in this process, and one of the important things to know about Minneapolis is that this is a highly participatory planning environment. Both organizational stakeholders, larger institutional stakeholders, and individuals expect to be able to weigh in loud and long on all aspects of planning. So the first thing that happened in this process was an identification of strengths and gaps in the food system in Minneapolis, using elements of community food assessment, which is one technique it's standard to strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats kind of analysis that planners often do. And the focus of this analysis in Minneapolis was on farmers markets, community school and home gardens, small enterprise, urban agriculture, and in general, just trying to bolster the local food production environment. The result of this process phase was a set of 72 recommendations and 146 detailed action steps, including very clear specification of who was to undertake these activities, under what time frame, and which activities would be taken by parties other than the City of Minneapolis's Community Planning and Economic Development Department. Next slide, please. So phase 2 of this process has involved implementation of, phase 2 of Homegrown has involved implementation of the things developed in the recommendations developed in the process phase. 7 implementation work groups are being supported by city staff and departments, and they're working toward 6 key recommendations in particular, including the establishment of a food policy council, which has taken place, and the development of an urban agriculture policy plan. And this plan was formally adopted just about a year ago in April 2011. And it's really a remarkable plan, and Kim and I think it's the only one of its kind in the United States. We haven't seen another one yet. And so there are numerous cross-references in this urban agriculture policy plan between the goals of the Homegrown Minneapolis report and the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan and the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth. And I refer you, I guess, to Chapter 5, the Recommendations and Implementation section of the Urban Agriculture Plan, because there's an excellent cross-referencing table there with a list of activities and major recommendations of the Urban Ag Policy Plan for incorporating urban agriculture uses into long-range planning and amending the zoning code and all manner of other activities. Okay. So you can see both in Minneapolis, both the progress made toward the larger implementation of the Homegrown process, and many of the steps are either completed or nearing completion and solidly on track. So this has been a very dedicated and comprehensive effort to mesh the interests of community food systems planning with the more traditional planning interests. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and fly a little higher still and take a look at a regional planning example, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC, and talk about their efforts to do food system studies and make food system plans for the greater Philadelphia area. DVRPC covers a 9-county planning area, and in 2010 conducted a greater Philadelphia food system study focused on agriculture as an industry, the food distribution network, the regional food economy, and social capital. They were looking at a 100-mile food shed that encompassed 70 counties in a 5-state area, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and Maryland, and looking at assets, challenges, and opportunities within the food shed. And they found a number of very interesting things related to trends in the system, 2 in 3 adults in Pennsylvania and New Jersey are overweight or obese. The total market value of agricultural products in the 100-mile food shed in 2007 was $6.7 billion. 14 million tons of food freight are moved annually within the greater Philadelphia region. And they, through the course of their food system study, discovered 150 plus organizations and individuals who were interested and willing to be involved in the DVRPC's Food System Stakeholder Committee. They went on then to do, this 2010 study became the basis for Eating Here, Greater Philadelphia's Food System Plan, which took place over a 2-year planning process. Next slide. This plan was released in February 2011 and extends the results of the Greater Philadelphia Food System Study with goals and indicators and recommendations for a sustainable, resilient food system. And it's really a remarkable, I think, extension at a regional scale of food systems work. The plan is driven by a vision of a food system in which agriculture is a valued and economically viable occupation, natural resources are preserved and regenerated, healthy food is accessible and affordable, and diversity in crops grown, businesses flourishing, and amount of consumer choices exists all across the region. And I've listed a few of the top recommendations for the region. There were 52 total. This is a heavily agricultural region, and so affordable farmland is really important. Healthy food awareness and access, specialized agriculture enterprise development programs, a robust farm-to-school program, and a continuing convening of the Food System Stakeholder Committee were key recommendations. Next slide, please. Trends that were identified that were positive and negative in the region, and then I'll just touch briefly on some sample strategies for urban agriculture to sort of close things out. It's very clear that in the DVRPC region, farming and sustainable ag is under pressure. There are fewer and fewer acres in ag production, and farms are operating at deficits. Ecological stewardship and conservation, with water quality issues being primary, are great concerns. The region's overall health is declining, and an increasing number of households are food insecure. Food system workers' wages are well below the living wage and self-sufficiency, but there are some positive trends pertaining to strong interest in the local food and healthy food movements, a recognition that these can be key to economic development strategies. For example, healthy foods are more expensive than processed foods, but when people are given reliable access to healthy foods, they will buy them. Efforts to abate hunger and improve food system fairness are having an impact, and again, that solid stakeholder collaboration is there. Sample strategies for urban agriculture that are described in this plan have to do with tax relief and incentives for urban agriculture, recommendation that states should explore tax policies that provide additional relief for agriculture that is producing fresh food for local markets. Again, increasing access to land for agriculture and urban agriculture is important. Food enterprise zones in which incentives for urban food production, value-added, and food processing and healthy food retail conversions take place are recommended for local governments to adopt. Increasing access to capital, which is really hard for urban agriculture businesses and agricultural and food businesses generally to access, is key. Increasing the access to capital is key. A recommendation was made to explicitly include urban agriculture opportunities as eligible activities in community development block grant and other federal funding programs, so essentially taking the form of urban agriculture block grants. And then an emphasis on assisting urban agriculture professionals and others to build partnerships that lead to business development. this plan is really remarkable and very deep. Both of these plans run, both Minneapolis and DVRPC run very deep, and so I highly recommend taking a more in-depth look at them as you think about the work that you're going to be doing for the Denver region. Again, it's just incredibly gratifying to hear how many people are interested in so many different aspects of the food system. So thanks very much, and I'll hand it off.
Thanks, Marcia.